The moment I saw my fiancé kissing another woman in the parking lot of a grocery store at exactly 6 o'clock on a Thursday evening, my future shattered without making a sound. An hour later, after I had packed 2 suitcases and convinced myself I was ready to confront him, I heard a key turning in the front door. Instead of facing him, I slipped out through the back of the house and hid in the darkness of my backyard. Then I heard a stranger's voice inside my kitchen, and suddenly the betrayal I had witnessed in that parking lot no longer felt like the worst thing that could happen. My name is Diane Carter. I was 52 years old, divorced for 15 years, and finally convinced that life had given me a second chance. I lived alone in a quiet ranch-style home in Dublin, Ohio. My life wasn't glamorous, but it was comfortable. I worked as an HR manager, spent weekends tending my vegetable garden, and enjoyed the kind of routine that comes from surviving heartbreak and deciding never to invite chaos back into your life. Then Greg Thompson appeared. Greg was dependable in all the ways that mattered. He remembered anniversaries. He fixed things before I even noticed they were broken. He called my mother on holidays and never forgot a birthday. For 3 years, he became woven into every corner of my life. I trusted him completely. That trust died in a grocery store parking lot. I had stopped after work to buy coffee creamer and a few household supplies. Nothing unusual, nothing memorable. As I pushed my cart toward my car, I noticed Greg's SUV parked nearby. At first, I smiled. Then I saw the woman. She stood close beside him, laughing at something he'd said. Before I could make sense of it, he leaned forward and kissed her. Not a friendly kiss, not a misunderstanding. A kiss that spoke of familiarity and practice. I froze. My mind desperately searched for another explanation. Maybe I was mistaken. Maybe it wasn't Greg. Then he placed his hand against the back of her neck in the exact way he always touched me. And every doubt disappeared. I watched them drive away together. I don't remember loading my groceries. I don't remember driving home. I only remember sitting in my driveway staring at the engagement ring on my finger and wondering how 3 years of trust could vanish in less than 10 seconds. Inside my house, panic slowly transformed into heartbreak. I called Greg. No answer. I called again. Voicemail. I sent messages. Nothing. By 9 o'clock, I was throwing clothes into suitcases. I wasn't planning to leave forever. I simply couldn't bear the thought of looking at him. Every photograph on the wall suddenly felt like evidence. Every memory felt contaminated. Then headlights flashed through the front window. My stomach tightened. A moment later, I heard metal scrape against the lock. Someone was coming inside. Instinct took over. I grabbed my purse, slipped through the back door, and hurried across the dark yard until I reached the detached garage. The cool September air felt sharp against my skin. I crouched in the shadows and waited. The front door opened. Footsteps crossed the hardwood floor. Then I heard a voice, but it wasn't Greg's. It belonged to a man. Older, rough, angry. "Greg," he said, "we need to talk." My pulse exploded. Who was he? Why was he in my house? A few minutes later, another vehicle arrived. This time I heard Greg. "What are you doing here?" he demanded. The stranger laughed bitterly. "You know exactly why." Something in Greg's voice changed. Fear. Real fear. Curiosity overcame caution. I crept toward the kitchen window and peered through a narrow gap in the blinds. The stranger stood beside my table holding a thick envelope. Greg looked terrified. Then the stranger dumped photographs, documents, and receipts across the tabletop. Greg's face lost all color. And standing there in my own backyard, watching 2 men argue inside a house that suddenly felt unfamiliar, I realized something terrifying. The woman in the parking lot was only the beginning. I remained hidden outside while their conversation grew louder. Every few minutes I heard my name. That frightened me more than anything else. The stranger wasn't simply confronting Greg about an affair. He was confronting him about something much larger. Eventually, the man introduced himself. His name was Jack Reynolds. Then he said words that made my entire world tilt sideways. "Your girlfriend," he told Greg, "is my wife." For several seconds, I couldn't process what I'd heard. Greg had been engaged to me. At the same time, he had been carrying on a relationship with a married woman. But Jack wasn't finished. He pulled out photographs, hotel receipts, messages, bank records, evidence of a double life. Greg tried denying everything. Jack calmly dismantled every lie. The affair had lasted for years. Weekend trips, secret meetings, false business excuses, an entire relationship hidden behind carefully constructed stories. Then Jack revealed something even worse. Money. Large amounts of money. According to him, Greg had convinced multiple people to invest in a supposed property development project. Promises of future returns. Promises of financial security. Promises that sounded believable because people trusted him, including me. My heart nearly stopped when Jack placed a document on the table. My name was printed on it. Beside it sat records showing tens of thousands of dollars transferred into accounts I barely recognized. Greg had told me the money was being saved for our future. Instead, it appeared to be part of something else entirely. Something dishonest, something calculated, something much bigger than infidelity. Eventually, a twig snapped beneath my shoe. Inside the kitchen, both men turned toward the backyard. The secret was over. I stepped from the darkness and walked toward the house. Greg immediately tried taking control. "Diane," he said, "we can explain this." Explain. The word almost made me laugh. After everything I'd heard, explanations felt meaningless. I demanded the truth. For the first time all night, Greg seemed unable to find the right lie. The story emerged slowly. Not from him, from Jack. Every time Greg attempted to soften reality, Jack produced another receipt, another photograph, another message. Piece by piece, Greg's carefully crafted image collapsed. There wasn't only one woman. There were several. There wasn't only one financial arrangement. There were multiple investors. There wasn't only one betrayal. There was a pattern, a system, a lifestyle built on deception. Then something else surfaced. My younger sister, Lisa. Months earlier, she had asked about an investment opportunity Greg recommended. I had assured her he was trustworthy. Now Jack showed me documents with her name attached. My blood ran cold. The money she had invested wasn't a few $1,000s. It was nearly everything she had saved. The realization hit harder than discovering the affair. Because Greg hadn't only deceived me. Through my trust, he had reached the people I loved. I immediately called Lisa. When I told her the truth, silence filled the line. Then she said something that made me physically ill. I gave him $50,000. The room spun. I closed my eyes, because in that moment I understood something devastating. I wasn't just another victim. Without knowing it, I had helped Greg gain access to others. I had vouched for him, trusted him, defended him, and now people I cared about were paying the price. When I returned to the kitchen, I wasn't thinking about reconciliation anymore. I wasn't thinking about saving a relationship. I was thinking about accountability. And for the first time that night, I knew exactly which side I was on. I didn't sleep. By dawn, my heartbreak had transformed into something colder and stronger. Clarity. Later that morning, Jack informed me he had organized a meeting. Several people connected to Greg's investments would be there, including Lisa, including Susan, including others who suspected they had been deceived. Part of me wanted to avoid it. Another part knew silence was exactly what people like Greg depended on. So I went. The community center looked ordinary enough. Rows of folding chairs, coffee stains on old tables, bulletin boards covered with local announcements. Nothing about it suggested lives were about to change. People began arriving. Some looked nervous. Others looked confused. Then Susan walked through the door. For the first time, I saw the woman from the parking lot up close. She looked exhausted, not triumphant, not happy, just broken. A few minutes later, Greg arrived. Even then, he behaved as though he could still control the narrative. He greeted people politely, smiled confidently, acted like a businessman preparing for a presentation. The performance lasted only a few minutes. When everyone was seated, Greg stood and began speaking about misunderstandings, rumors, confusion, miscommunication. The usual language people use when they hope facts haven't caught up with them yet. Then I stood. The room fell silent. I looked directly at him. "I'm not a rumor," I said. Something shifted. Jack activated a projector. Photographs appeared on the screen. Hotel records, text messages, financial transfers, emails, dates, names, evidence. One image after another. One lie after another. The truth didn't arrive dramatically. It accumulated. A mountain built from thousands of small deceptions. Susan eventually stood. She admitted Greg had told her he was separated. Another investor revealed retirement savings had disappeared. Someone else described nearly identical promises. Then Lisa spoke. Her voice shook, but her words were clear. "You told me Diane trusted you." The guilt hit me like a punch. Yet for the first time, nobody allowed Greg to redirect blame. Nobody accepted his explanations. Nobody protected him. The room had finally started comparing notes. And once people shared their stories, his entire structure collapsed. Greg looked around desperately. His audience was gone. His influence was gone. His control was gone. "You'll ruin me," he said. Lisa answered before anyone else could. "You did that yourself." Silence followed. Heavy. Final. Eventually, security escorted Greg from the building. He didn't argue. He didn't make a speech. He simply walked away, smaller than I had ever seen him. Afterward, nobody celebrated. People stood in small groups sharing stories, comparing experiences, and realizing they weren't alone. The damage remained. Some money would never return. Some relationships would never heal. But something important had changed. The truth was finally visible. Months later, lawsuits followed, investigations followed, consequences followed. Life slowly moved forward, not back to what it had been, forward. Lisa and I rebuilt our relationship. Jack returned to his own life. And I eventually began speaking at financial literacy events, sharing my experience with other women, because I learned something through all of it. The most dangerous weapon people like Greg possess isn't charm. It isn't manipulation. It isn't even deception. It's silence. They survive because victims remain isolated. Because everyone believes they're the only one. Because nobody compares notes. The moment that silence breaks, and if there's one lesson my story taught me, it's this. Trust your instincts when something feels wrong. Ask difficult questions. You may not save the life you thought you had, but you might save yourself. And sometimes, that's the most important victory of all.